Hello, everyone, and thank you for your continued interest in the Ukrainian topic. Today, I will talk in more details about the trade relations between the European Union and Ukraine and how they have changed since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. After previous several webinars, I received several requests from the listeners who expressed a desire to learn more about the European grain and oilseed markets, as the European Union is a major export competitor for both Ukraine and the United States. So I would like to first give you a brief overview of agricultural production and trade in the European Union, and then talk in more detail about Ukraine's grain and oilseed trade with EU. I also have for you updates regarding grain and oilseed production in Ukraine, and bonus slides at the end of my presentation regarding prices on the grain and oilseeds world markets. I may skip a few slides during my presentation as it's quite long. You can see this from my slides, but I decided to keep them as you may be interested in more detailed information later. So, in 2024, the European Union's agricultural industry created an estimated gross value added of 234.1 billion euro. Agriculture contributed 1.3% to the EU's GDP in 2024, about the same share as last 15 years. The value of everything that EU's agricultural industry produced in 2024 was an estimated 532.4 billion euros. I have here this exchange rate that you could imagine in dollars for American listeners. One half of the estimated value of the total output of the EU's agricultural industry in 2024 came from crops. This is around 266.4 billion euros, within which vegetables and horticulture plants and cereals were the most valuable crops. 40.6% of total output, or 216.1 billion euros, came from animal production, which in turn creates significant demand for cereals. The EU produced 271.6 million tons of cereals in 2023. The weather conditions in 2024 were not favorable, so cereal production fell to approximately 225.2 million tons. The prognosis for total cereal production in 2025 is around 279.6 million tons. Wheat accounts the largest share of grain production in Europe. In 2024, wheat production accounted to 112 million tons, followed by corn of 59.3 million tons and barley 49.7 million tons. Eurostat data differs slightly from the USDA estimates, especially for wheat. The expectations for 2025 are higher so far, 126.6 million tons forecast from Eurostat, and actually 10 million tons more optimistic forecast from USDA. The projection for corn for both Eurostat and USDA is around 63 million tons, barley 53 million tons. The area under cereal crops was slightly decreasing until 2024, ended up at 49 million hectares, 41% of which were under soft wheat, 21% under barley, and 18% under corn. In 2025, the area under grain crops increased by 1 million hectares thanks to higher wheat plantings. In 2024, cereal yields were relatively low, with wheat amounted 5.5 tons per hectare. For comparison, the average yields for wheat in Ukraine in 2024 were 4.6, while in the US only 3.5 tons per hectare. Average yields for barley in the EU were 4.8 tons per hectare, while 3.9 tons per hectare in Ukraine and 4.1 tons in the US. Corn yield in the EU were 6.8 tons per hectare, while in Ukraine it was 6.4 and 11.3 tons per hectare in the US. Corn productivity in the EU is much lower than in America, ranging from 6 tons per hectare to a maximum of 8.4, while wheat yields in the EU are generally higher than in America. 2025 is projected to be more successful for the EU than last 3 years. The major producers of wheat in the EU are France with the 28% share, Germany 17%, Poland 10%, Romania 8%, and Bulgaria 5%. Major corn producers, again, France 25%, then Poland 15%, Romania 14%, Hungary 10%, and Italy 9%. Major barley producers, again, France 26%, then Germany 23%, Spain 8%, Poland 6%, Denmark 5%. Germany and Poland are leading producers in rye with 40 and 35% share respectively. Poland and Finland are leaders on oats production with 26 and 17% share respectively. Oilseed production in the EU is not so intense compared to cereal production. In 2024, the EU totally harvested only 16.6 million tons of rapeseed, 8.3 million tons of sunflower seeds, and 3.1 million tons of soybean. For comparison, in Ukraine in 2024 was harvested 3.5 million tons of rapeseed, 10.2 million tons of sunflower seeds, and 6 million tons of soybeans. So totally, Ukraine on its own was able to produce under the war conditions 72% of total oilseeds production in all 27 European countries. In case of oilseeds production, USDA data just slightly differ from the Eurostat. In 2025, the EU is expecting around 19 million tons of rapeseed, 10 million tons of sunflower seeds, and 3 million tons of soybeans. Major producers of sunflower seeds are Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, and France, with a share from 21 to 17%, and Spain producing 10% of total EU sunflower production in 2024. The major producers of rapeseed are France, Germany, and Poland with 23, 22, and 19% share respectively, followed by Romania 7% and Czechia, Czech Republic 5%. The largest producers of soybeans in the EU is actually Italy, making 37% in 2024. Then France, Serbia, Romania, Croatia with 13, 11, 10, and 8 share of the total EU soybean production respectively. The oilseeds crops area in the EU is 5 times less than cereal crops, around 11.6 million hectares, with rapeseed amounting for 49% of oilseed crops in 2024 and sunflower around 41%. Soybeans occupied no more than 10% of the oilseed sowing area. In 2025, the replacement of 200,000 hectares of sunflower with rapeseed is estimated. In 2024, oilseed yields were also relatively low due to the weather conditions, with sunflower amounted to 1.7 tons per hectare. For comparison, the average yield for sunflower in Ukraine in 2021 were 2.1, while in the US 1.9 tons per hectare. Average yields for rapeseed in the European Union were 2.9, tons per hectare, while 2.8 tons per hectare in Ukraine and 2 tons per hectare in the US. Soybeans yields in the EU were 2.7 tons per hectare, the same as in Ukraine, while in the US it was 3.4 tons per hectare. So soybean productivity in the EU was always lower than in America, while rapeseed yields are higher by 1 ton per hectare. Soybeans kind of leading in America compared to Ukraine and the EU. In terms of sunflower productivity, Ukraine always had higher yield than EU or the United States. For next year, as you can see, the increase in yields for all oil crops is projected in 2025 unless another drought will come as it was last years. Here are balances of the EU supply and demand for cereals. You can learn them in more details later as you have my slides. I would like just to make several comments. First of all, European Union is reducing stocks that they generated in 2023 after liberalization of trade with Ukraine due to the war situation. It is primarily at the expenses of wheat and barley. Second, 1/3 of domestic use is directed for animal feed. Third, in general, gross harvest of cereals is pretty close to the domestic use. However, if we look on the balances of separated grains, wheat and barley, production exceeds domestic use, while for corn, domestic use is higher than production, which makes Europe net exporters for wheat and barley, but net importer for corn. In 25-26 marketing year, European Union is expecting to export around 29.8 million tons of wheat, 10.1 million tons of barley, and import around 18.2 million tons of corn. The situation for oil seeds is opposite. Domestic production in the EU is lower than its domestic consumption for all oil seeds and byproducts. Besides, EU is net importer for all oil seeds. Also, they are slightly increasing ending stocks. So EU technically is a big potential market for oil seeds and byproducts. Looking at the different types of agricultural production in the European Union, we can state that their self-sufficiency for many products is satisfactory to cover domestic needs, generate sufficient stocks, and export some products to the rest of the world. However, this is not true for corn, oilseeds and byproducts, and sugar, and even in 10 years, the EU will be still a net importer for those type of products. So now let's take a look on the European Union agricultural trade. The EU is an important player on the world agricultural markets. Although the EU has a positive balance overall, imports have been growing at a higher rate than exports since 2022, when the full-scale war in Ukraine began. In 2024, agri-food exports accounted for 9.1% of total exports, and agri-food imports made up 7.1% of total EU imports. United Kingdom and the United States are the primary destinations for agri-food products from the EU, with 23 and 13% share respectively. Ukraine is on 13th place, making 1.5% of the EU agri-food exports. On the import side, Ukraine is on the 3rd place, supplying 7.6% of agri-food import to the EU, followed by the United States with 7% share. Agri-food exports to Russia is still among top destinations of agri-food products from the EU, which is a little disappointing considering Russian military invasion of Ukraine and all sanctions that take place. So the EU agri-food exports reached a record level in 2024 and an increase of 3% compared to the peak in 2022 and 23. The EU kept exporting a diversified basket of products, topped by wine and beverages, followed by animal products, and then arable crops and plant-based products. Higher exports in arable crops and plant-based products in the period from 22 to 24 was driven mainly by cereal preparations and milling products. It was also some re-export of cereals imported from Ukraine. Also, there is a decrease in the import of arable crops and plant-based products in 2024 compared to 23 and 22. It is still higher than before the war in Ukraine started. The stronger growth in import value led to a decline in the EU agri-food trade balance in 2024. Looking at more detail on trade in the arable crops and plant-based product category, we can see that only cereals and cereals preparation and milling products have positive trade balance. For the rest products, imports exceed exports. The cereal preparation and milling products category was growing, reaching 24.8 billion euro in 2024. Given the decline in grain exports, it can be assumed that the EU has been processing more grain into products with a higher value added and increasing their exports, which accordingly increases the EU trade revenues. The 20% reduction in grain exports in value in 2024 is explained by 12% reduction in prices and 9% volumes exported decrease. The main destination region of the EU cereal exports remained Sub-Saharan Africa, 28% of the EU export volume in 24%, and North Africa, 27%. In terms of cereal imports, the main origin region is Eastern neighborhood, including Western Balkan and Turkey. We can observe significant increase in share of this region from 2022 because actually Ukraine belongs to this category. Second largest origin for cereal imports is North America. Now let's discuss EU trade of main crops in volume term. Export of soft wheat had increasing tendency from 2020-21. In 23-24 marketing year, EU exported 35.4 million tons of wheat. However, this year, wheat export from the EU is expected to be much lower, around 10 million tons less. On the following pictures, data are mainly for 24-25 from July to March, the latest published by European Commission, but I observed at trade monitoring through custom surveillance data that by June 15, only 21.1 million tons of wheat export were recorded. So this confirms that around 10 million tons less Europe gonna export this year. The major destinations for wheat from the EU are Algeria, Morocco, Nigeria, and Egypt. The major exporters among member states are not the same as major producers. Remember that was France, Germany, Poland. However, the share of Romania and Bulgaria in export is much higher than that on the mentioned countries. This is due to available access to Black Sea and closeness to Ukraine, and re-export of wheat produced in other countries, including Ukraine. Prior to the war, France was the wheat export leader among the EU countries. The EU imports of wheat is 3 times lower than wheat exports. In 24-25 marketing year, over 61% of wheat were imported to EU from Ukraine, and the volume has doubled compared to 5 years average. Canada supplied 15% of imported wheat, Moldova 7.4%. The share of the United States is 5.4%, and the amount delivered was twice more than 5 years average. The major importing countries were Spain, almost a half, Italy over 21%, Romania 5.2%. Again, those countries have access to the ocean, and it was easy for them to import more than for other countries. The situation on the EU corn market is opposite. Imports significantly exceed exports. Moreover, in 24-25 marketing year, the EU corn imports exceeded 23-24 marketing year and 5 years average. But corn exports in 24-25 is much lower than last year and 5 years average. As you remember, for several years in a row, corn production in the EU was insufficient due to the weather, and also domestic demand for corn grows, and it's much higher than domestic production. So the EU has to import up to 20 million tons of corn annually. This marketing year, by March, European Union imported 16.5 million tons of corn. 56.4% came from Ukraine, which was always the main origin. Almost 21% this year came from the US, replacing corn from Brazil. You can see how much this increase was. The main EU importing countries are Spain, 38.5%, the Netherlands, 17.3%, Italy, 13.3%, Portugal and Ireland with a share of 7% each. Although EU is a net importer of corn, some countries who are the biggest corn producers in the EU still export some corn. In July-March of 24-25, around 2 million tons were exported, of which 49% went to the United Kingdom, 11% to Israel, 10.5% to Turkey, and to Switzerland, Lebanon, Iran, and Norway. Largest exporters of corn are Romania, 35.8%, Poland, 27.5%, and France, almost 19%. Again, we can observe mainly exporting countries which has access to big water. Barley is the second cereal crop produced in the EU. In average, barley export is around 10 million tons annually. By March 2025, European Union exported 7.3 million tons of barley. Last 5 years, you can see that China was major destination for European barley, but not this year. Another large buyer of barley is also Saudi Arabia. Major exporters of barley are France, 33%, Romania, 23%, Germany, 16%, Belgium, 9%, and Bulgaria, 5%. As you remember, Romania, Belgium, and Bulgaria are not top producers of barley in the EU, so we can assume that they re-export some barley from other countries. Again, all of them have access to big water, which is important for easy export. During July-April of 24-25 marketing year, EU imported 1.1 million tons of barley. Main origins for barley were United Kingdom, almost 46%, and Ukraine, almost 38%. 10.5% of barley imported from Moldova. The main importers were Spain, 27.7%, Ireland, 17%, Cyprus, 13%, New Zealand, almost 10%, and Belgium and Romania. Imports of oil seeds and byproducts to the European Union is many times higher than its exports. Therefore, I will concentrate my attention only on imports. Oilseeds and protein crops remained a key EU import and reached €20 billion in 2024, which is 12% of EU import value and the third most imported category by the EU. Totally, EU imported around 43 million tons of oilseeds and byproducts in 2024. The main origins in volume were Mercosur countries, 52%, Ukraine, 17%, which sits in those 19% of Eastern neighborhood, and North America, 17%. Soybeans account for the largest share of oilseed imports to the EU. On average, EU imports 14 million tons of soybean annually. Here are latest aggregated data for July-March in 24-25 marketing year compared to similar period over 2 decades. Soybeans have always negative balance, and war in Ukraine did not impact much European soybean market. Significant part of imported and produced in the EU soybeans are processed for soybean oil, which has been exported all over the world. Since 2012-13 marketing year, trade balance for soybean oil in EU is positive. The largest supplier of soybeans to EU are the United States and Brazil. It is quite obvious how Brazil's second soybean crop fits into export competition with the United States on European market. In 24-25 marketing year, but mid-June, US delivered 5.8 million tons of soybean to the European Union, or 43% of imported soya. Brazil's share this year 40.5%, followed by Ukraine's 11%. The largest importers of soybeans are New Zealand and Spain, with a share of 24% each, then Germany 17% and Italy 15%. Second large importer oil crop to the European Union is rapeseed. On average, European Union imports 5 to 6 million tons of rapeseed annually. Similar to soybeans, trade balance for rapeseed is negative. Imports significantly exceed exports. Besides using rapeseed for biofuel production, European Union processing it for oil. Since 2020, the European Union has increased its export of rapeseed oil several times. So far, 500,000 tons of rapeseed oil was exported all over the world. Over 46% of rapeseeds come from Ukraine. I believe the European Union would wish to buy more rapeseeds from Ukraine, as it is cheaper logistics compared, for example, to Australia, which has 38.5% share. However, Ukraine's export capacity for rapeseeds is limited. The major importing countries are Belgium, around 28%, New Zealand 23%, Germany 21%, and France 27%. Since 2018, the European Union trade balance for sunflower seeds has been negative, although imports and exports are very close, except for 22-23 marketing year, when due to the war and damage of 50% of electricity system, Ukraine was not able to process sunflower seeds into oil as usually, and were exporting sunflower seeds to Europe because of interrupted logistics through Black Sea. During last two marketing years, European Union imports of sunflower oil increased. Besides, we can see higher exports of sunflower oil in 22-23 and 23-24 marketing year, meaning that Europe crashed imported seeds into oil for further export, as well as it was some re-export of sunflower oil from Ukraine. I would expect to see Ukraine as a leader of the EU sunflower seed import origin, but not. 59% of sun seeds in 24-25 came from Moldova, and its share is growing. Ukraine has only 13% of the European market on sunflower seeds, followed by Serbia, China, and Turkey. Romania and Bulgaria together imported over 63% of sunflower seeds, the closest neighbors to Moldova. As for sunflower oil, here Ukraine dominates with a share of 95%. So far, European Union imported 1.9 million tons of sunflower oil. The quota went to Spain, 16% to Netherlands, 13% to Italy, 10% to Poland, and 9% to Bulgaria, followed by France and Slovenia. All mentioned countries have access to the coast, so not necessarily import came through the land borders actually. Now, let's look at the EU agricultural trade, particularly with Ukraine. In general, Ukraine and the EU have always quite intensive trade, both export and import, especially from Ukraine side, and this constantly growing. Many people believe that Ukraine's overall imports to Europe have increased since the beginning of the war, which is actually not true. You can see that import kind of declining and export from EU to Ukraine is increasing. But this is, we are talking about general trade, all goods of Europe with Ukraine. In fact, export of goods from Europe to Ukraine increased by 14.5 billion euros from 2021 to 2024. And in 2024, European Union's trade balance with Ukraine reached a record 18.2 billion euros, and it continues to grow in 2025. But the structure of the EU import and export with Ukraine is quite different. As you can see, among top 20 products imported to the EU from Ukraine, half is agricultural products topped by vegetable oils, corn, and oilseeds. But among top 20 exported goods from the EU to Ukraine, none are agri-food products. Majority is different types of machineries, telecommunications and electrical equipment, medications, ammunition, petroleum and gas, and other things that of high demand considering war conditions. However, there are exports of goods related to agriculture, such as fertilizers and agricultural machineries that are needed very much. So in general, only 8.5% of goods export to Ukraine from the EU is agri-food products, while imports is 53.5. Obviously, that in terms of agricultural trade, EU was always main market for Ukraine. Yes, its share almost doubled since the beginning of the war, but even in 2021, 32% of Ukraine's agricultural exports were directed to Europe. Arable crops and plant-based products are the main category of Ukrainian exports to the EU. Its value in 2024 was over 11.1 billion euro, twice more than in 2021. While overall trade balance of the EU with Ukraine is positive, agricultural trade balance was always negative. Ukraine is truly breadbasket of Europe. In 2024, cereals import to European Union from Ukraine amounted to 34%, oilseeds 24%, and vegetable oils 23%. It is very disappointing that Europe restricts agricultural trade with Ukraine, which is suffering from Russian invasion, while allowing imports of agricultural products from Russia. Yes, import from Russia is much less than from Ukraine, and it is getting smaller, but even this 1 billion euro of export revenue would be a big help for Ukraine rather than supporting aggressor countries. This import from Russia can be easily replaced by Ukraine. You would expect that such import comes to some European countries that are more favorable to Russia, like Hungary or Slovakia, but not. The major agricultural importers from Russia are Germany, France, Netherlands, Belgium, and even Poland, whose farmers were blocking Ukrainian borders to stop agricultural import from Ukraine. It is very visible that imports of cereals from Ukraine to Europe significantly increased after the war started. However, not right away, but after the autonomous trade measures were applied, eliminating all quotas and tariffs from Ukrainian import, as well as after Black Sea ports resumed their operations. So not all export from Ukraine to Europe goes through land borders, but also through Black Sea ports and the new ports. So I believe that major concerns for cereal imports related to wheat rather than corn, since European Union is self-sufficient in wheat, but not in corn. The peak of grain export from Ukraine to the EU was in 22-23 marketing year, amounted to 27.5 million tons, when Romania, Spain, Poland, Italy, and Hungary swallowed 80% of grain delivered from Ukraine to the European Union. Many other countries increased their purchase of grain from Ukraine, except for Netherlands. In 23-24, Spain became a leading importer of grain from Ukraine and is continued to be so. However, the volume they bought in 24-25 is much less compared to 23-24. Romania is no longer the leader due to the reduction in trade via Danube River after the reopening of the Black Sea ports and their cheaper logistics. Initially, Netherlands was one of the topper buyers of Ukrainian grain, and now they also increasing their grain purchase from Ukraine. So by the end of May, Ukraine delivered so far 17, almost 0.4 million tons of grain totally. So next three slides reflect more detailed information on monthly grain import from Ukraine to the EU. Here is wheat. We can see now how much Romania and other neighboring countries were buying from Ukraine at the beginning of the war, this in red. Spain was a leader of wheat import from Ukraine even before the war. However, its share increased to 70% as well as volume. By the end of May, Ukraine exported to European Union over 5 million tons of wheat, 8 times more than in 2021 marketing year totally. The main buyer of Ukrainian corn is also Spain now. However, before the war, that was Netherlands. Again, we can see how much Romania was buying at the beginning of the war. In this marketing year, Ukraine exported to EU so far 11.6 million tons of corn, almost twice more than before the war. In 24-25 marketing year, Ukraine exported to the EU 5 times more of barley, although it is not so significant export as corn or wheat. The biggest buyers, again, Spain, 63%, followed by Cyprus, 18%. So now let's take a quick look at oilseed markets. Oilseeds and byproducts export from Ukraine to the European Union from September to May of 24-25 marketing year amounted 7.8 million tons and is already exceeded the level of 2020-21. Sunflower oil is still occupies the quarter of Ukrainian oilseed and byproducts export to the EU. The rest of export structure has changed. The share of soybeans increased more than 2 times, as well as soybean meal. The share of rapeseed, sunflower meal, and sunseeds decline. The leading buyers of oilseeds and byproducts from Ukraine in this marketing year is Poland, followed by New Zealand, France, and Germany, who were leading importers before the war as well. All European countries increased purchase of oilseeds and byproducts from Ukraine. So next 9 slides are devoted to the details of the import of oilseeds and byproducts from Ukraine monthly by the different EU member states, and I actually going to skip them. You can, yes.
Sorry, since we're kind of at a breaking point there was a question in the chat. Let me just, I don't know if you have the chat available. What is the takeaway for the U.S. grain industry members regarding current Ukraine and EU trade relations? What should we consider here, and what would be needed from a Ukraine perspective?
So I will discuss later in my slides now what is going on in trade with Ukraine, because there are some quotas that were imposed just at the beginning of June, and this really limits the Ukrainian agricultural imports to European Union. So in this situation, Ukraine should consider more diversify its export, also to continue negotiations with Europe to negotiate quotas and tariffs. Also, maybe encouraging production of those products that quotas are not filled out. Maybe introducing a mirror measures limiting EU imports of imports to Ukraine, protecting domestic producers. So this would be like, and also maybe limiting Russian export to European Union. That would help Ukraine another $1 billion, because so far with all quotas that gonna be in place till the end of the year, Ukraine can lose around $3.3 billion. So regarding other countries, the competition will increase on other markets because Ukraine will need to diversify their exports. So it definitely will impact destinations for example, American corn and other products where Ukraine will compete with, I don't know, higher prices, lower prices, we'll see. But yeah, on other markets, Ukraine will be present more than it was for the last 3 years.
All right, thanks. That's all there was. You can go ahead and move ahead there.
Okay, so then continue on oil seeds. So as I mentioned, I would like to skip those slides where is more detailed information. Here is about rapeseed oils and major importers and exporters, rapeseed meals. So actually, I would stop for a second on sunflower seeds imports. You can see how unusually big was import of sunflower seeds from Ukraine to European Union, and that was mainly Romania, Poland, and Bulgaria. That was due to, as I mentioned earlier, due to so much damage to electricity system that Ukraine was not able to crash. And also it was so much ending stocks of sunflower seeds and oil that was no room to store more oil. So that is why the sunflower seed import to European Union was so large, but not any longer. You can see it, so far it's only 66,000 tons was imported in this marketing year. So this is for sunflower oil and sunflower seed meals and soybeans and soybean meal. So you can soybean oils. You can look at this later and learn. Here you can see that soybean oil, Poland actually the major buyer of this product from Ukraine. So since we started to talk about tariffs and what is going on the trade side between Ukraine and the European Union, so let's start from that Ukraine is candidate for the European Union membership, and the association agreement between the European Union and Ukraine actually includes this deep and comprehensive free trade area, which is provisionally applied since 2016. The DCFTA aims to boost trade and in goods and services between the European Union and Ukraine by gradually cutting tariffs and bringing Ukraine's rules in line with those of the European Union in certain industrial sectors and mainly agricultural products. In response to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the European Union has granted Ukraine full trade liberalization, suspended import duties, quotas, and trade defense measures for imports from Ukraine as a temporary basis. This is known as autonomous trade measures, or trade visa-free, as we say. These measures entered into force on June 4th of 2022 and were renewed for subsequent years on June 23 and June 2024. Thanks to these measures, as you could see from previous slides, the European Union significantly supported Ukraine's economy by helping alleviate the difficult situation faced by Ukrainian agricultural producers and exporters. However, as I mentioned, farmers in Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary protested and blocked the borders with Ukraine. So these countries unilaterally introduced restrictions against Ukraine in 2023. In response to this situation, the European Union introduced quotas in 2024 for some products that are of serious concern to European Union producers. On June 5th, 2025, the visa-free trade regime for products from Ukraine was terminated. So technically, Ukraine is returning to the pre-war trade conditions. Also, it is called kind of like free trade. It has many restrictions, including quotas. For 2025, limits are calculated according to the 7 of 12 principle, because there are 7 months left until the end of the year. So the quotas have been reduced proportionally. The quotas were supposed to be allocated evenly for each month to ensure more even distribution. Such adjustment would significantly impact the sales of seasonal products. For some products, 7 months period is divided for 2 sub-periods. The volumes in quotas are exempt from duties. Anything exceeding quotas will be subject to duties. Customs rates, in turn, have a combined structure and include an ad valorem component, a percentage of the value, and a specific component, a fixed amount per unit of goods. So currently, Ukrainian government and European Commission are negotiating the future conditions for next and following years for trade quotas. It is expected that quotas will be increased for the products that have lower self-sufficiency rate in European Union, and Ukraine will be able to export more. This table represents the quotas that applies to Ukrainian agricultural import to the European Union. So this column represents quotas for Ukrainian import that were in place before the war, and this is the base that was used to count those 7 of 12 share. Ukraine exports capacity for many products, as you can see here, significantly exceeds current limits. So especially for maize, honey, eggs, sugar, and other products imported to the US. So, and then European Union indicated as those products as sensitive and imposed some limitations when the import in 2024 exceeded average imports in the period of from 1st of July of 2021 till December 31st of 2023. So if this import for those goods were bigger than average import for those that mentioned periods, so European Union added some limitation. But you can see that with the quota of 650,000 tons for corn in 2024, Ukraine imported, European Union imported from Ukraine over 11 million tons of corn. So third column, this is quotas for Ukraine's import to the European Union by the end of 2025. I would say that application of this 7 of 12 proportion for the rest of 2025 year is still better than continuing that counting all imports from Ukraine from the beginning of the year, because they could say like, okay, you already filled all the quota and no more import from Ukraine. In such scenario, Ukraine would not be able to supply any agricultural product that the import of which already exceeded annual quotas. For example, in 2025, Ukraine already exported to the European Union 1.4 million tons of wheat. Quota, as you can see, 1 million tons. If quota would be counted for the full year, Ukraine would not export any more wheat to the EU until the end of the year. With 7 of 12 proportion, Ukraine will still be able to export around 583,000 tons of wheat. Or, for example, corn. Ukraine already exported 4.5 million tons of corn in 2025 to Europe. Applying 7 of 12 proportion, Ukraine still can export around 380,000 tons. However, actually looks like duties for out of quotas corn is going to remain zero, while import duties will apply only to byproducts, as there is high demand for corn in the EU and lower production, so they might allow it to have free trade for corn in the EU. But those import quotas and import tariffs could hurt very much. For example, for corn byproducts, import duties is around 43%. So is there is a profitability then? I don't know, probably not. So for the next year, if the size of quotas will stay, Ukraine will need to diversify its agricultural exports, since export capacity of Ukraine are much higher than Europe is going to buy from Ukraine, to avoid import duties for out of quotas amount. Ukraine, so those would really need to find new markets. For example, duty rate for sugar is around 419 euros per ton, while the market price is about 520 euros per ton, so almost double it. Duty rate for wheat around 95 euro per ton, for barley 93 euro per ton, so adding almost a half to the market price. With such high rates, it will not be efficient for Ukraine to export agricultural products to the EU over the quotas. The losses, as I mentioned, of Ukraine from such quotas are estimated to $3.3 billion till the end of the 2025 year. So, as I mentioned, Ukraine will search for alternative markets, which means that there will be high competition of the other markets. This actually also can lead to a decrease of planted areas of certain crops for which quotas are small. So this is kind of the situation that it's really concerns Ukraine and the rest of traders, what is going on. And I have the question, Rich, there is a question.
Yes. If quotas force Ukraine to reduce exports to Europe, how will the ongoing war with Russia affect access to new buyers? That's the first part. And then how much will Russia be able to limit movement of ships?
So first of all, it will depend from our air defense, if they will be able to protect our Black Sea ports. Ukraine will continue to supply just to other destinations, but Europe is much closer, and it means that logistics is more simple and also cheaper rather than supplying products to other countries. So this is a question of price and insurance. If Russia will be able to limit movement of ships, who knows? Every day is different, and you can see that latest attacks were harsh, and that was a lot of damages. Thanks God, no damages to Black Sea ports. But again, it will depend from how strong Ukrainian air defense will stay and how much support we will receive from our allies, from the United States, from European Union and other countries who support our fighting for our freedom.
Okay, thanks.
So at the end, I have few slides regarding overall export of grain and legumes and oilseeds from Ukraine. So as you can see, actually this marketing year is almost over, and this is the latest data as of June 23, 2025. And as you can see, the export of grain and legumes in this marketing year is almost 10 million tons less than in previous year, including almost 10 million tons less of wheat and around 8 million tons less of corn. So technically, we also already can see the impact of quotas. If we compare June of 2025, where quotas are already in place, and June of 2024, you can see that all export of grain from Ukraine and oil seeds is significantly less in 2025, almost double, right? Twice less compared to 2024. This is very visible on this diagram. So you can see that is a drop in June, those dotted lines, that is a drop of export of corn, wheat, and barley. It's not a full month, but 23 days of the month. It can be a little bit higher, but it still be lower than in previous years. So we technically returning to the 2022 years where the export was interrupted and logistic was complicated, much more. It's still complicated, but was much more complicated. So a few words about what is going on with sowing campaign. It's over. Um, in general, Ukraine was able to plant around 99% of what was forecast, but it's lower than it was, of course, in 2024 and 2021. Also, it's a little bit higher than in 22, 23 years. We can see that Ukraine increased areas under spring wheat, but the area under corn was slightly less. However, the sunflower area increased, and everyone was expecting that we will plant even more soybeans that we had last year, but looks like not, minus around 200,000 hectares in this year. And of course, this will reflect on the grain and oilseed production in this year. So here I have a little comparison of expectations of Ukrainian Ministry of Agricultural Policy and Food and USDA, and all over the cereal crops. Actually, USDA is more optimistic, but I guess Ukraine now is expecting limits in production due to exhausted soil and exhausted farmers and their abilities and finance. But also the winter was not really favorable. That was first year when Ukraine didn't have snow, which is terrible for winter crops. That was good for our soldiers who were fighting, but not good for crops. So as a result, our export will be lower, both due to lower production, but also due to those quotas. So we expect actually that due to this, Ukraine will generate more ending stocks, and I have balances so you can see that. So technically, Ukraine is expecting to export around 21 million tons of corn, 15.5 million tons of wheat, around 2.2 million tons of barley, 3.7 million tons of soybean, 2.7 million tons of rapeseed, and very little sunflower seeds export. So here's the balance. Here is for grain, and next slide is for oil seeds. So as you can see, the ending stocks, what I mentioned, gonna be higher than in previous year, and the same for oilseed crops. So you have my slides, and you can learn this later in more details. And it got updated all the time because of the trade, and also some data were not available due to the war conditions. So there is some updates all the time, so you can follow the changes. And that is a bonus slide that I mentioned at the beginning. There are information about prices. As you can see, American wheat is kind of getting higher the price. It's still lower than compared to European and Ukraine, but higher than Russian. On the feed wheat, Ukrainian feed wheat is more expensive than Russian. So you can see how it was traded in different exchange stocks. In terms of corn, Ukrainian corn is the most expensive right now. Argentinian and US is pretty similar. on the barley. Australian barley is the most expensive. But Ukrainian is higher than Russian. So Russia tries to decrease their price to sell more as they can to reduce their stocks. Here, few prices for oil seeds. So on sunflower oil, Ukraine is around $1,120 per ton of sunflower oil. European is much more expensive. Sunflower meal trade from Ukraine in the price of 2020 to 2025. Soybeans, Ukrainian soybeans is less than 400, although it's different bases. But Argentinian, US, and Brazil are higher, and Brazil is the most expensive. So, but if you would compare this, for example, soybean meal, sunflower meal with Russian, so it's pretty similar in Ukraine as in Russia. So I guess this is it, what I was planning to tell you today. And if we have any questions and any comments, I can see some direct message that Dan O'Brien made in my chat. And he mentioned that current tension between Iran and Israel may split over the involve Russia, then because Russia is so close to Iran, right? So yes, there is a potential that it can change the direction of Russian trade and maybe Ukrainian and American trade.
Likelihood of Ukraine moving into these other markets price-wise? Are they low enough cost in order to move into some of the markets that they haven't been in before, I think is maybe what he's wondering.
Ukraine is all the time trying to find other markets. And this is more geopolitical issue rather than only economical, right? And especially on the African markets, now it's very hard to compete with Russia because Russia tries to export more and more to African countries to convince them support Russian regime. So sometimes it's not only about price and the cost, but yes, logistics it's getting cheaper, but it's still very complicated and expensive. And without subsidies, it will be hard, especially to compete with European markets, with European farmers, because you know that there is a common agricultural policy in European Union, and with this common agricultural policy, significant part of farmers' income is subsidized, and it's hard to compete with them, not only for Ukrainians, but also for many other farmers around the globe. So it can be maybe some good idea to have some mirror measures for European import to Ukraine to protect our farmers, to make them more competitive and help them to generate more income that will be used for further buying inputs, fertilizers, machineries, etc.
And just had one came in now. Any sense of what the quality factors are for crops this year? For example, with the lack of rain, do you expect higher protein wheat or more milling quality wheat?
Unfortunately, I cannot tell about the quality of wheat. Not my specialty, and I didn't read about that yet. But I read and I know for sure that yield's gonna be lower due to the lack of precipitation during the winter time. So that is as much as I know for now.
You had a comment from Dan and then a question from Greg there. Dan's comment, for the sake of finding the best deal price and quality wise, it would seem that Ukraine grain will go anywhere that it makes sense economically, as long as trade associations and politics aren't limiting, and probably the
Right,
logistics as well.
right.
And then
Yes.
from Greg, are you seeing any influence in pricing and or destination being influenced by carbon sustainability factors?
So, um, mm, I don't see them right now in Ukraine. Although you need to understand that since Ukraine is the candidate to membership in European Union, we have to apply all the uh, requests and all the standards of the European Union, including the green gas, um, emissions, etc., and carbon as well. So we need to meet all the standards, phytosanitary standards, carbon standards to become the members of the EU. So that is an issue. But regarding the pricing so far, I guess under the war conditions, that is not the major concern for Ukraine compared to import of fertilizers and export of goods.
And Dan also commented on that. Other than in the EU, I don't know of any other countries who make that a factor. The EU is the main unit focused on this right now.
Right, right. So, but as I mentioned, that if Ukraine is going to become a member of European Union, we don't have choice. We have to follow the European Union rules according to the association agreement.
And then another question, do you have any initial or general sense of what the trade agreement might look like for the EU and Ukraine trade in 2026?
What I read from the news, so currently the negotiation between Ukrainian government and European Commission is going on, and we try to negotiate to increase the quotas or at least decrease the import duties that would help us to export more. It also very important would be like it was during this 22-24 period to have um, transit for grain without limitations because many products not go to the final consumers in Europe, but through Europe to other countries. And having this free transit, that is would be important, that they would not count as an import to the EU. That would be important to negotiate.
Okay, good discussion. Anything else here? Whoops, there's one. For oil products, how has the use of the extracted oil changed in the last 5 years?
So Ukraine is mainly producer of sunflower oil, and you can see that prices are growing. Of course, it was a peak when the war started, when the logistic was interrupted, but that was more for grain even rather than for oil. And in this term, India was also one of the major importer of sunflower oil from Ukraine, but as you can see, Europe is the major destination. So Europe really needs sunflower and other oils, vegetable oils. So if Ukraine can increase extracting oils and build more processing capacities, and that would help both to Europe have this oil and to Ukraine to have higher revenue from selling high value added products. So that would be a solution, but prices are growing.
Well, I'm not seeing anything come in. So, Antonina, thank you. I appreciate you doing this again.
Thank
And
you.
everybody, thanks for being on for this. The recording for this should be available later this afternoon. So I'll send an email to everybody when I have that ready to go. So thanks again, and we'll catch you another time.